Eventually I'll string them all up and look at them with pure, unadulterated ending.
They can send anything they want. They're never sending that. If FASe doesn't want to have to rename SaUR, keep quiet about that. If FASe doesn't want to have to rename, if FASe doesn't want to have to rename SaUR, keep quiet about that. I have it on my heart. Sometimes I do wonder why we doesn't just elope in a mystery. Till I look at my heart growing from one. Sometimes I do wonder why we doesn't just elope in a mystery. Till I look at my heart growing from the chooses and the lives of us. I think of his always. You're too late. I build nasty looks never existed case I needs to change gloves. It's in the papers. Never left. Deep down inside somewhere, dear, I know. I'll never let a bad thing happen to you. I stand hides. Yes, is innocent. Especially if I love you. Deep down inside somewhere, dear, I know. I oughtn't never let a bad thing happen to you. Eyes tan hides. Yes, is innocent. Especially if I love you. Bronson into Hades with an attitude makes me feel special. That takes balls. And you did? I does. I do. No need, I think. My soul is in your eyes now. Prancing into Hades with an attitude makes me feel special. That takes balls. And you did. I does. I do. No need, I think. My soul is in your eyes now. So you'll dizzy lost without me. And make this classical soft chord edging on to land is the best of times. Stay all dizzy lost without me, and make this classical soft chord edging on to land is the best of times. Land is the best of times. Land is the best of times. No matter what I am, that's what it takes to make one seductive. Swash me. No matter what I am, that's what it takes to make one seductive. Swash me. Oh, I'm in your eye now. all over your eye right now. This is me in your eye. Mm. 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 Yeah, it should be like that. Yes, it should be this way. Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Say like a mouse.
Tim Jim Lem Jamore. Nele me qua splugen. Your groin. It falls after loud looking. That's close enough. One more step, Pilgrim, and I'll be forced to snatch your panties. And I ain't kidding.
I don't know what you don't get. The Better Business Bureau doesn't give a shit about you.
You buoyancies know what an accidental die can do to a fox. Yeah, you figure it's a trick question, does ya?
No use denying now, Helga. Come out with your... Stay in there. Ow, ow, ow.
So, like, yeah. Anybody mind if I put you guys into groups or something? I'll call them meteor food. It's maybe all we're good for giving. Maybe hashtag should have slowed down and lived a lot. Should have slowed down and lived a lot. When's the last time you've seen they don't exist?
Best I can figure.
I am a phone. No, you should watch her split her necessity to remember with her necessity to laugh about being a phone. Make sure you let me be the first to pilot the pool out. She splits her necessity to remember with her necessor to laugh about being a phone. There. That should fry the heart plate by the time the blood recirculates. Ha ha. Equals a motherfuck. Thanks for the schematic on hunting motherfuck, by the way. Yeah, I just needed to tell you about wheels in motion. You think it's a wise practice to have no control over injection sites? You look pretty bitchin', Dove. The red in the back of my mind would totally ruin your complexion. So there's an example of putting a third string backspace bank on a leash and writing a history in tandem. Somebody's super gay.
What's the clock say about super gay?
You think a planet's enough to hold me? You better believe I'm thinking about your ovum. Who the hell's gonna bake that kryptonite for me? Yeah, I see what you're saying about breaking up the bread and watching the sand pull out and stuff. Not long ago, I made a commentary record on the tampon. And in this discussion, I wouldn't put strings here. I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, but I wouldn't put strings here. And they're both on the same trajectory, execution, deposits of potentially advantage, but I don't envision there being a simple way to explain the pair of those relationships to this vector of comprehension or of slutting or of high C's. What you mean about breaking up the breads and letting the sands pull out and stuff. I left out wheels in motion from the discussion at speed, which I doesn't regret, and it's rather clear. It's very clear that you know, when you have priorities and they're not being filled by knowing dependencies at all times, and there's knowledge and there's information and there's lensing and there's derivatives of logic, you have these the passage of time and focus on places of thought that you might wonder or attempt to position information formats, weapons or sluts or pressure envelopes, so on and so forth. The fulfillment of knowing, like when you know that there's importance and you know that they touch at configuratives of ideas and sight, and then there's just the passage of time beside that. Maybe you don't do anything with it, maybe you do, but that's what it is. It's this passage of time, and then there's these ideas and information and time, and it's very clear to me that the filling of the richness of sight or the richness of adding to repertoires or removing greatness of an up-and-coming something ever. Okay. I wasn't really talking about a tampon, but anybody that would try and use these concepts may be seen as a tampon to a force of time measure that maybe knows these things and doesn't place or design itself, and just knows what is happening to the concepts, where they're being generated, where they're being workforced, where they're being incorporated. And it's such a fuck of an idea, because it's probably in some cases the guiding light of horizons of evil to alter to lesser states of evil. And at the same time, it's probably a guiding light of mass, of the in proportion to the real, that the significance of those relationships maybe has the least audience of all relationships. Maybe has the least amount of proving force between it. And the subject is sort of like there's no clear ground. There's no clear ground on which the best are standing at the clarity of tampon and string and wheel and breaking of the bread and letting sands out. There's no clear ground to consider why any of these thoughts, the tail end of this discussion, maybe don't need to be anywhere. Maybe they doesn't need to be designed in proportion to ever. As an example, clearly things are designed in proportion to these concepts, but there's no clear ground anybody stands on and says, I have and hold the clear ground of this moment to fixate, proportion, and add or remove or showcase the power of the clarity, the power of the knowing, the power of what does it mean to engage neutral around you? What does it mean to know the forces knocking at your door are, depending on the clarity, simply aren't? What does this mean? And that guiding light of horizon energy that stands on time, that stands on relation, that stands on good, you might say, stands on the real, you might say, stands on musts and maybe interests of survival. But these guiding light highnesses at vectors of pressure, they might have real relationships to what's knocking at a door. It might not be a total control of neutral by any one switch, but the clarities we have, or the patiences we develop, or the maturities we believe in, or showcase, or prove we have, or demonstrate in time, or know, or adhere to, or doesn't change because we doesn't change ourselves sometimes. There's a lot of relationships in the simple consideration of massing at clarity that isn't stood on. And nobody needs a slut. maybe in any function of relationship to these realities of sight, or these realities of learning at time. And there's a lot of ways that's been studied and considered. But the clarity isn't really grounded, because there's either awareness of what is at definable survival. See, the longest time ago, all right, without form, without justice, without expectancy, without dependability, listing of sight to known to realness of importance, either singly, significantly, relationally, or dependency quotientable. Just lists and lists and lists and lists. Such as a bird flies and lands and habitates and wakes up and flies and eats and lands and habitates somewhere close by, but different. Not the same place. We love this bird. We follow this bird. We study this bird. We catalog this bird. The things the bird has seen from one day to the next aren't the same things. There's a whole splay of different things the bird has seen. Maybe we have a list that describes what the bird has seen. Maybe we can prove this is what the bird has seen, and we can describe it. Maybe we can know that the things that the bird has seen aren't starting a fire on our lists. Each of these examples go on a list. The longest time ago. Lists and lists and lists and lists of things that could be seen or experienced or known or remembered or real in time. No exception. These types of stuff. No exception. Truths of lists like that, forever unchanging. And I'm not even going to get into costs of keeping lists in proportion to performance or speed or time, but big lists. Anybody mightn't feel or remember or know every single important relationship they should be thinking about or focused on or utilizing to keep people or things about time together as they are doing anything. Anything. And impossibility is, you might find critically, always a factor of that site, and yet maybe the least truly defined for or with an experience.
And what is a guidance of horizon that knows this or doesn't know this at any time, with anything, ever? I might never find a program that explains I don't want simple definitions between impossibility, desire, to experiment on performance of horizons in these lights. And these are few and far between relationships. Few and far between relationships. I'm not going to say next to none know these things, but guiding a horizon the longest time ago in a list of somebody on their way to trying to write or stage or interpret, the longest time ago list is symbiotic or assimilated to the concept of survival. Okay? I'm talking about a list that equates to survival priorities. No, it isn't. It's few and far between that a pressure of that grounding of stability is, I can't even say tolerably, apathy. But it's sort of the idea. I can't say harmony, but it's sort of the idea. Because I won't tolerate these things. When I talk about these things, when I focus on these things, when I'm bringing forces together to consider these things, these are not the concepts that are, I mean, the respects of simplicities of these relationships, the definitions of toleration to ever even see them or hold on to them are probably massive. Incredibly long lines of coding, incredibly long lines of transition that simplify in processing at ranges and speeds, but at the mere simplicities of concept, they're just non-tolerables because they're infinitely minute pressure formations at critical forevers. So, like, I hear the word good. Okay? Good. Good. Well, here's some time I've spent talking about not really grounded reality in some senses. However we define good, that's how we define good. There's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing evil about this. But the mere fact that some of these horizons of energy might draw on or relate to lists of the longest time ago, you could throw anything at it. Good, best, better, light, dark, fastest, strongest, meatiest, most magnetic, whatever you want to throw at it. It is so simple to the longest list that maybe none of the concepts are tolerated to describe it in a simplicity, in a conversation. You simply can't describe it. And that isn't helping if I am directing, if I am shepherding, if I am helping or holding or loving or sexing or surviving or changing or aiding or defining. And horizon experience is few and far between, maybe not even coherent sometimes to pressures in space. It happens for some people, places, where the experience of knowns embodies or emboldens energy and aids in the changing or shaping of lives' affairs. Happens all over the place. I don't know when and where. I don't care to talk about when and where. But few and far between doesn't help when simplicity, right out of the gate, maybe always, hits, and as good as anything is good, as best as anything is best, as worst as anything is passing. The description of our experience, or the real true, even if it's 100% true, here's 5 minutes and it's just pure good. Sure, okay. But that 5 minutes of pure good might not have any impact on what the longest time ago list. I'm not even talking about people. I'm not even talking about efforts to build or hold an environment or control things. I'm talking about energy arranged in proportion to stability, in proportion maybe to any place. About lists of what experience is. What experience is. See, I, as a bird, may see something. The largest audience that has ever been an audience, to ever be an audience, might see it through me or with me. There might be no denying it. It might be totally true. But in all time, it is, after all, one moment of one sight, at one reality, at one pressure. And boy, shouldn't I build a slut here? Because wouldn't you like to find out how insignificant any moment of true sight is to you, on its way back to you, on its way to impact the things you're doing, so on and so forth. So there's infinite potentials in respects that anyone might have to any moment that ever happens. Infinites, 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 infinites. Here, few and far between experience is maybe removed from guiding horizons. Maybe always. Hard to know how study of infinite potentiate should or will or always limits guidance of horizons by anybody, whether it be walls of effect, or slowing of speed, or chasm of influence upon chasm of capability. Infinites. And knowing in these relationships to steer something, touch something, utilize a knowledge to create an opportunity with infinites, the longest time ago lists as concepts. However important, however caustic, however diabolical, however wise, however good, however harmonied, any choice will ever be about these types of concepts. After all, they are just moment in all time. After all, They are just a proportion of whatever. And I went through who guesses it's wise to injection earlier in this discussion. I didn't mention it here, but these are injection pressures at wheel, and there's zero harmony. Not in a design sense. There's zero harmony in a destructive sense of those considerations. Zero. And yet, this isn't creation of abolishment of memory. And after all, it's just a moment next to no one sees. It's just a moment next to no one is getting paid to fix problems. It's just a moment, no matter how many of anybody there ever is existing. They are just a fraction of a glimpse of a problem they're not getting paid to fix. And so, why sight or moments of learning in time are safe? Quote, I could see through a bird zero utility right next to my nourishment, my lifeline, my salvation, my heritage. Zero utility right beside one another. Why is it safe I see and learn this? Why is this safe? There isn't an infinite amount of answers. There are infinite numbers of things that have influenced the answers. There are infinite numbers of things that are on their way to influencing what the answers are. But experience and very, very, very long lists are part of the answer, are part of those relationships, are part of recording realities and all sorts of entropies and pressures and determinants, diagnoses, opinions, recollections, variable knowing sights and histories. We know what we see. Good. It's certainly easier for you to know what you see and be protected because that's good than it is for no one to ever be able to explain to you why you don't know what you see all the time. Why you doesn't know what you see all the time. But the need to know what you see. I've got a list of 4,500 quotes. There's a list from the longest time ago that has infinite numbers of quotes in it, probably. How easy is it to prove or be remembered as guiding a horizon to discuss or prove or know any relationship between those two lists. Any relationship. This is maybe varnished because it's correct. It's a very vast weight of potential unlikelihood. And yet, the question really is, who's connecting those two lists about guiding horizons to explain what specific forces need to be at what specific quote, at what specific time, with what specific view in proportion to all injection? And dominion of resource or time or influence sees what ground in knowing the question. Well, any ground they see is a ground anything living needs a list to delete the ground, potentially. Stability of all time is clearly not a simple deposit of programming or of entropy or of enshrinable givens at any size. These things are not simple. And paths of learning maybe grow near to these appreciations in redundancies or in relations or goodnesses or knowns of safety or lineages of passages of information and pressure. But forever is a constant marble of numbers approaching masses of incomprehension at pressures of injections and record. And at any time, these numbers approach seldomly comprehension of things like wheel, tampon, and injection on ground to stand at infinities of knowing why we're looking together tomorrow, or why I can walk without walking into a wall tomorrow, or why a bird can fly without drowning in dust tomorrow. These are all proportionally related to finiteness of relational possibility. History of relational possibility. Building memories of relational possibility. Experiential wisdom as a word describes what origin at vantage. In an obviousness that it maybe is unclear, experiential wisdom is a word that protects a specific origin at a vantage. Because the experiential wisdom, shaped by what? Time, a list, specifics of individuals, definitions of a world, size of knowns of the universe, infinite numbers of variables perhaps. Experiential wisdom may be exponentially billions of interpretations at consideration of numbers approaching mass, experience approaching centrifuge or periphery or involvement, and correlatable or non-co-equal definitions of relationships approaching attempts to define injection or necessity or witness or passivity or record, may be separate than any form, any design future, or any survival necessity. See, these finalities approach gravities of appreciation, gravities of sight, gravities of forever, but they're maybe always distancing from culpability of impact of survival. Maybe selflessly, maybe selfishly, maybe wickedly, maybe disheartedly, maybe unspiritedly, maybe honestly, maybe innocently. Who knows how you describe it? In any case, but it's few and far between that are touching a heartstring of a few and far between at a horizon of guidance, or a design of guidance for horizons. It's very, very minutiating necessities, histories of necessities. See, as the utility of understanding in these minutiae is of value somewhere, keeping up with the modernity of capacity and speed and capability, period. You'd consider that. Just the value at time, at relationships, in proportion to however streamed or uniform or natured or normated or enveloped anybody's perspective is about minutia. Maybe millions of doctors of minutia of world scope in proportion to modernity that are, they're valuing lists of minutia in proportion to next to zero histolographical record at any number of definitions of whose history it is. Okay. They're concerned to keep up with the trends of progress, quote, or change, or entropy, or relation, or threat, or saturation, however these things are defined on utilities, survivals, feeling thermometers, epidemiologies of any variety. Stack them all together forever and always. Those efforts to hold in those passivity register necessities amount to what? Oversight of the list from the longest time ago. Maybe none. maybe defining the speed of evolution of technical capability should have something to do with considerations of facets of both sides of that relationship. And maybe the decisions are as near to never historicized as anything. But how does a number define a gravity that a number never sees? And why faith, as an example or as a truth, why faith in anybody that knows that or suggests that they know in that? Why faith in it? There's something that maybe approaches never being sphinctered or limited at a world frame. You say, I have an experience in defining limiting numbers about this conjoinment of consideration of two lists. The sheer supposition of that realm of efficiency to define survival plane utilities maybe suggests impossibility to prove where it comes from. It may be one of the finest cases of necessity. If somebody clearly has to relate to these sides of epidemiology or passivity and bring truth together, and it means something, why in all time would you ever tolerate not knowing where it comes from? In a world clearly that doesn't base everybody's survival on a plane to protect something that isn't known about from where it comes from, to touch on two lists in all time on a normative, to become a forever conflict of horizons of forever and knowns of survival. But how would you ever horizon faith or known belief in minutiating numbers approaching gravities? Because earlier in this discussion, maybe there's unclear amounts of numerical gravity at relation, at saturative, at influence, at dominion, and then near to impossible to limit influence considerations. You know the numerical saturation is on a crash course with maybe pressures in time to reduce those ingenuities at obviousnesses, because the functional formation of valuing learning doesn't have a value at the obviousness of these sphincter utilities. Learning with no value, right on top of pressures that have no ground, right on top of discussion, you can't excuse design of anything in proportion to in all time. So gravities of numerical involvement, clearly very difficult to define. You might say in a traditional scientific or program state. Difficult to define in a traditional state. You get maybe a billion groups have this amount of iota of defined quality to want to be present to certain concepts of relationship because of how they value what they relate to. It's their planet, so there's a billion groups, okay. But they're maybe never uncomplicating the ground. They're maybe never uncomplicating the traditional memory utility saturation comparison. These are horizontal influences. And yet, from horizon to application maybe is a very fast appreciation of experience and apathy or sensuality to such a state of design or programming or configurative. So you'd have infinite numbers of future states being influenced by a consortium of a fraction of the population of everywhere being in attendance to any particular moment of any place in space, wherever that might be. Wherever. And how any of them, feel that they didn't invent the safety that tolerates any amount of time they spend considering or glimpsing these sheer facets of relationship to time. It's very clear they did not invent the safety of this. It might be infinitely clear they may never, as a consortium, invent the safety of this. And yet there is maybe infinite amount of responsibility in knowing that relationship is true. Because they're not going to sit forever and look at this idea forever. There's going to be normal. There's going to be tomorrow. There's going to be the next thing they want to think about at an importance or focus on or relate to. So there is a safety at horizontal, you might say, authority. There's maybe a billion. In this conversation, there's maybe a trillion variables of safety specifics at injection of programming or data entropy, with or without real-time visions at any number of compounding trillions upon trillions upon trillions of specifics. And it's so ultimately clear that maybe nobody alive today invented these safeties. And there's an unknown number of relators to such a pressure. That's true. There's an unknown number of sentiments about that relationship. That's true. But it is no ground. It is no standard of development, of forecast, or of transfer of history, or building of memory histories in any number of cases. It means it's very difficult for anybody ahead of time to walk into a position and say, I know you earned the safety to be protected for such a discussion because you don't know how much to value in any particular safety near to the discussion. Might not be clear to anyone. What were the exact constraints that made it possible for you to witness, for you to experience or feel? Might not be clear to anybody what that required. What it truly required. But it isn't a ground. I know, I remember, I need to know something like that. I need to know something like that to effectuate vacuum, sponge, filter, and certainty of data communications about a populace that I relate to as a populator modulator, about a pressure I can't prove I create, in a time I can't prove I generate all the safeties for. But it's one big happy horse ship at this point. Ship with a P. Something I need to know sometime. But I may never write a song about knowing that. I might never justify a weapon to hold that. I might never prove I should receive an electron for participating in knowing that. What makes it possible to relate in a safety that isn't defeating of all time at horizontal relationships in proportion to sizes and certainties of sphincter might not be clear to anyone at this time. And because somebody could know it might not be clear to anyone at this time, how true is the passivity history of such a pressured momentum? How true are the attempts to influence such pressures at such momentums? See, the fixation on questions maybe approaches what is my flock? What are my kids? What are our banking residuals? How are these things fleeting and disturbing and harmonied? Any type of question. See, these are where the simplicities are active. These are where the simplicities are performant, reactive. The list of the longest time ago is maybe never going to tolerate this experience and that experience and this experience and that experience and this experience and that experience to grow. Now we can impact that list. Now we can impact these forevers of complexity, because we've had these reactive, non-active things. Because it's ultimately important to know what can't step in to a safety pressure. What can't step in to something that isn't groundable at design entropy. That's what's ultimately important. Truths of a record like that are maybe applicable to simplicity of experience. See, at some point in time, the protection of historical forevers depends on specificity of injection point certainty. And the highest priority probably doesn't fall in a code of access. It probably falls in an entropy of pressure, because these limits approach deciding what environment is safe to variables. It approaches that because to protect the knowledge, here is the point of inflection that showed the true data of where a calamity was happening. Somebody has an eye. That eye witnesses data. That eye witnesses reality. That eye witnesses time. That eye witnesses specifics. Somebody has an eye that witnesses time, data, and specifics and reality. And those particular specifics happen to be who would try and step into this discussion and ground at design entropy for horizontal infinities. Because wherever that eye is, there has to be safety linearly connected to a momentum. And the specificity of that safety impacts the injection of what happens when it is known what types of things try and design on these entropies. Because there's never going to be a simple faith in an executor of variable definition in a computer to oversee these variable magnitudes. They're going to have to be realities of pressures of entropy defined at sponge filter. Thus, impossible to destroy true knowledge of problems of variable magnitude. So, a billion approaching variable magnitude impact their safety. Their knowledge of learning of appreciation maybe impacts the speed by which any of them create energy that maybe simply always fails to destroy limits. But maybe the rate they create energy decreases in proportion to some types of variables. These experiences of appreciation of magnitude of safety have been studied forever. They're in forever longest age ago lists. And yet there may be very, 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 very ungroundable concepts at expertise of normation. In that God is maybe the first responsible for developing ego that prioritizes the ungrounding of these types of listings of safety specifics, because in creating these egos there is maybe zero ration that proves at any time zero groundability of a discussion like this. At any time. So the ego of age or connectivity or knowns or discipline or discipleship or necessity is very, very different, not only in philosophy, but if anyone could compare any ego God creates of these ungroundings to anyone that isn't created so specifically, or developed so specifically, or worked so specifically, comparing these ego perspectives, you think a God outright owns the reality? Or you think the specifics go to a list in proportion to pressures of entropy in proportions to certainties of magnitudes of safeties? Because the reality of experiential protection of that state maybe approaches the least amount of conversation in space at any time. Maybe it happened a trillion years ago. It was the least talked about conversation. Maybe it's on its way to being the least talked about conversation. It's a hard expectation to prove you need to have a final position on? Think about that. Who's going to design you correctly to have a perfect final opinion of something just like that? To look at might not exist truly forever in the same lens, and define the safety of all, and define the safety of everywhere, and define the safety of need to ration at sponge or filter or sphincter pressure at entropies of horizontal guidance. Who is going to construct you perfectly for this final opinion, when you might not be able to even prove who's comparing two egos at a pressure of finality? Who is going to do this? You see, the times of learning and the times of the past and the times of limit and the times of safety becomes ultimately clear there must be priorities in even the possibilities of being able to forecast or focus or see or design or know in any number of approachable relationships to these concepts. Not only how they arise or why they're important or what basis are they coming from. I hate these goddamn questions. I especially hate them today, because there is no motherfucking basisy, because you can't even stand on the positions of the beginning of this discussion to ground a godforsaken thing. So I know somebody knows with forever behind them somewhere. It is not straightforwardly simple to build an all-time appreciation of this place, of time. It's not simple to hold a memory of it that you care about. It's not simple to believe the things I'm saying are true. The way I feel about it is true. These are not simple things. It's not simple to love everything. But these knowns, these forevers, you would look at a week ago and say, here is why we ground, love, blah. You can't give me one good reason I haven't shot you all right here. And you probably shouldn't want to. You probably shouldn't want to be very open to entertaining the thought. You probably shouldn't want to be very open to enshrining it in a history. But I hate basis. And I doesn't. There are more impossibility sequiturs of lensing, of what is real in an eye, at the divide of basis and can't love everybody, than maybe any conjoinment of safety math derivative in all time. And I don't know that there will ever be anybody that ever exists that proves the longest list of experience without defining survival, and maybe the greatest chasm of basis and can't love everybody. Need connected. I don't know that there'll ever be anybody that exists that proves these things need to be connected. However, I do know that somebody will attempt to stand on the ground of that known. They will attempt to science the harmony of those pressure knowns in proportion to all, and they will attempt to design things in proportion to those two circumstances, somehow attempting to define their dominion over both lists of maths. They will do this in direct proportion to the obviousness that so very long ago I knew. To see here, to faith here, the experience in the basis divide would maybe be closer than they've ever been before. And maybe need to absolutely be most unapproachable in proportion to supervision of their specificities of such a pressure. I knew the impossibility for God to antiquate the ego costs at perspective of these peripherals of injection would not be becoming any simpler for there to be any supervision over those two vectors of necessity, maybe to this precise discussion, specificities. The wheels, the tampons, the injections. The clarity, these were all potentiates. I knew this so very long ago. But why is maybe no one going to attempt to be designing on these moments is what? An infinitely long time ago, there is no answer to the question. The answer to the question is planning of limit and impossibility. Today, the answer to the question is possibly adhering to planning or devoting to zeros, devoting to no's, devoting to doesn'ts, devoting to can'ts, devoting to elimination of extraneous potentiate inclination to design oversight of some types of specificities. Let's see. Elimination of potentiate channels of fixation at certain priorities. Some of these types of things, any number of forces might touch variables in constraints of truth that they might very well see are unlimitedly powerful. Some of these considerations of time and pressure and utility, you might be anybody. You might approach knowing everybody. You might forever be incapable of touching these breaks of variance of connection at supervision in all time. Very well. The best reason I can name why this is true, or should be true, or has always been true, because to even see why, you can't stand on it. But it's so overtly obvious to me that these rations of knowing in this, I mean, there's any class of disciple of science or tech or survival. There's any number of these disciples. I'm never going to let myself be concerned with their priority to become something in the face of these utilities of restriction. Never. So there's not even a point in entertaining clash of investment. But a 4-week-old isn't going to be prioritizing these things in proportion to the comic books she reads. But I can maybe never justify overtly standing on these points to explain why love is true, why you depend on safety of heart values or of time specifics. I can maybe never justify overtly placing these things in these ways. And that isn't simple either. When I think of rapture, of holding your soul, you keep it, but I hold it. And I bring you to the face of clarity, of finding redundant and obvious truth that will be remembered in where limits of the stretch of compassion and devotion may rest. When I think about bringing you to this clarity and your soul, I think there is no escape from the fact what we touch in ourselves at a pressure sometimes is not saving survival, isn't saving tomorrow, isn't effectually helping for our future or our children or the next place to exist. And so I think no matter how much shit comes out of our faces because we learn something and detest the way we exist and put it in an environment so that maybe something will end or change or our powers will change or we'll have better stepping stones to destroy lists with. What I think about when I hold your soul right now and forever is when I bring you to the clarity of truth in love and in consideration. It really is your soul. And I hold it. I think this is simple. It isn't. It isn't simple. Because the affirmations and the supports and the heritages that you have, experience, and recollect as maybe you consider these formatives or these relationships or these obviousnesses or these stretches of time. You look and you say, there's evidence that some of these never hands-on concepts They seem pretty hands-on to me. When you look at the redundancy of clarity in trying to appreciate evidence, I know it is not very simple for you to know what is true in your faith. A concept of proving support. I know your devotions to math or language specifics or billboard are intricately divided from existing forever, are intricately divided from touch of most of these concepts at design, and are intricately divided from proving you invent the safety of this time. And you know where I come from. You know how I got to this point in time. But I know, I think, whatever, whenever, now, and however we touch ourselves of these connections, we isn't going to be everywhere in this moment. We isn't going to define everywhere in this relationship feeling, in the feeling of it. We isn't going to be proving that the safety of all is being served by our lovemaking in one another as we orgasm on our knowledge of how good we are for one another. I know this. I know this blindly. I know this maybe forever blindly. I know this maybe forever blindly on top of everything in a tie with never to be tolerated in a conclusion at a pressure of all at an origin. Maybe. And I know it blindly in proportion to any force of magnitude that approaches any number of lists of influence to describe how forever needs to be. Blindly. And you isn't going to prove to maybe anyone how far up or down on a totem pole you might yourself be to ever even feel any of these blindnesses at any priority to these conclusions. In the time, in the conclusory, in the relationship, you probably don't even know what all the priorities are. You probably don't even know what all the eye lenses are. You probably don't even know where they're all going in redundancies, in relics of utility at energy entropies. But I know it isn't very simple whenever you connect with obviousness of faith placed by guidance of horizons that is in direct connection to your experience to this discussion. I know this is not simple. I'm not efforting to showcase how much simplicity I'm ready to show you, I'm aware of, you could touch to know you don't experience it. When you know there is nothing this powerful to own your soul more than you have it here, you do not know it. Is no basis. And what you have or hold inside, you have a very difficult time proving is level, is objective, is willing to see in truth, is knowing to value in simplicity, is proven to faith correctly at any number of fractal connectivities of time. The approach is very near to impossible for anyone to expect you to display your grace at the finalities of I love you. Very, very difficult. And this applies to anyone. Anyone. And maybe that stands out as a beacon in the graveyard that is not so simple, I hold your soul. A beacon you might find or recollect or dispel isn't quite harmony, but it is. Isn't quite as evil as it could be. But these possibilities, what is the possibility for you to find a beacon in a graveyard holding your soul at the finality in all time you can never hold? What is giving this? What is saving this? What is clarity to feel this? Maybe the questions coming from anywhere are enough to float a reason, or a vantage, or an ego, or a time frame. The questions coming from anywhere, first of all, they're never me. First of all, they're never the longest time ago appreciations. First of all, they're never an infinite number of things about reality, an infinite number of things about experience, an infinite number of things about mass of numbers at priorities of propagation, of safety. And I know, no matter how powerful as I make love to you in these times, we are simply failing to design the safety of the future. because we're designing our feelings, our memory, our significant placings of truth, and our obviousnesses of experience in and through time. Where focus is, focus isn't. But there are things that touch all things. There are things that change all things. There are forces in eyes with thought that alter everywhere. Maybe the goal is that these fractures of possibility doesn't exist chaotically, doesn't exist in an afterthought. Chaos and afterthoughts are no basis for soul holding. And I have known this logically maybe the longest. But I wasn't holding my ego and God today when I was. I wasn't doing these things. The truth is the truth. It's difficult to pre-understand how you will open yourself to experience with what you are given, with what you have. And any number of numbers isn't going to perfect this truth. Any number of numbers isn't going to see in this truth always the best. And this truth has everything to do with learning at maturities. This truth has everything to do with holding at reason. This truth has everything to do with preservation of anything majestically culpable. Any of it. But I don't know if there's anyone that ever remembers you walking from ego to holding your spirit in a graveyard to culpability with true love. I don't know that anybody remembers you doing this. But you'd be surprised with an amusement park. A screenplay. A mirror. You'd be surprised by these things. Any idea how much power is dripping beneath your feet that isn't even really there? Strange way to place hope. I know. You're going to think about one thing, think about another thing, and hope for a third thing. And then you're going to remember all three. You just tried putting that in me, Buster. But it's hard to know and really know why you should be knowing or why you should be communicating, why you should be focusing without things or with things. It's very difficult to know these things, and yet places must exist, and the experiences we've had or will have might happen or need to happen or must happen or should happen or won't happen, and the variables and the stimules and the specifics and the languages, all a part of it. But I would expect, in all the failed states of anything graceful or honoring, certainly allegiant to protecting thought, to arrive at any number of these conclusions, you could almost probably sit on these concepts forever and not forecast a bound of safety in any number of developments that will ever perform how they need to. And so when I hold blindly with your souls, I imagine sending out rays of little drops of sunshine about failing to perform, in sentiments to block out numbers and create armies of wicked and evil at an amusement park, because I'm clearly the most powerful prick of expectancy that is also blind. But nobody deserves this chastisement, because I'm effectively crucifying myself. More difficult still is appreciation of self-apathy in the frequencies of channeling dominion, in the realities that do and don't exist in real time. Certainly a challenge to place a memory in anybody or share a memory with somebody, and that memory be as case specific as blindness of crucifixion, and that their faith in telemetry, or their faith in what must be, or their faith in how much they trust in the forces that they build or want to build or care to build or relate to, that are building or talk to one another or communicate simply or share in safeties. Faith is kind of wicked at the learnings of influence, of minutiated pressures, because as infinitely important as any of these concepts are, as infinitely unstewarded as any number of souls are at any point in time, as infinitely critical as safety that has been developed to provide for survival is concerned, no matter how much of a luxury feeling gifted or powerful in time is, as those have their faith figured out, they have their dependencies figured out, they have their avenues of influence down to a science. no matter how much of this there is, we are not protecting tomorrow by depending wholeheartedly on minutiated faith of crucifixion and the obviousness of blindness of finality. Thus, as powerful as I am, I cannot guarantee that a scratched faith in any at observation, no matter how powerful they see in me, I cannot prove their scratched faith is guaranteed to protect their survival. I can't guarantee that they see maybe they're impacted from one way or another 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 way, and it's not always the way they had it figured out. I cannot guarantee there will be nothing to ever attack them. I cannot guarantee if they are attacked, their weapon needs to be faith. And yet every first and last one of their souls is in a relationship to these pressures. And in this way, I know there is the truth of devotion to live good and learn to become in what we may become is a strong basis of protection. But this basis is no match for this discussion. And I have held that without knowing it all along. I isn't going to end the discussion right here. I'm going to return to the brightness of horizon. I isn't counting it at this point in time. I isn't going to place it with whatever the next number would be on the brightness continuum, because I'm not placing it. Should I say what it was? Referring here to, there we were, and the gravity of horizon, minutia, and lists. Should I even say what it was? Distinctly obvious is whatever a list is to existence or survival or pockets of energy, it is least logical at this question, at this time. Least. And I will not stake this hand another time.
There might be zero evidence a God has ever given you dominion of this with a uniformity, and may I never give it. The posit, quote, the posit is maybe the deadliest instrument of quotables at time ration. It is meditating on creating energy at any time. The posit is as follows in proportion to death. Yet I'll continue. Quote, these interpretations may be very close to what isn't exactly blind, but what isn't exactly forgiving as you step in your learning to these interpretations. Weary is the path unbefalleth, and whatever it was, I will not stake this hand another time. Eyes have been considering these things, maybe this entire discussion. And everywhere they go has maybe no record of where these things come from. And I thus expect forever in no maturity of the posit. And yet, it isn't impossibly invisible. It isn't impossibly impossible to visit it. And here you'll find every reason to expect, maybe my first reason, to lower everyone and everything in any energy envelope of visitation of any creatorial dynamic of energy. But why is this considerable? Why is this considerable? Horizons. What is built near to perfection is built near to perfection. What is felt, what is necessary, and what is final are each things we do not wear on our faces. am I out of time? As I exclaimed. As I exclaimed is always a mechanism of ruin and maybe zero appreciation of zero expectancy at any point in time. But this is not a soul. This is not in the center of our mind. But it is maybe the softest reminder before your arms stop working, before your eyes bleed, before there is horizontal support for such survival necessities you depend on for your eyes, and maybe forever no excuse why you police a horizon on the content. And so the bounds of real, the bounds of time, and the bounds of exclamative they're needed. They're needed. They're knowing in themselves. And they're near to timeless. They're near to comfort. They're near to why be deadly? Why be a dead lie? Why see what hasn't point? Tendency and experience and definitions of necessity, definitions of survival, definitions of caustic variable or off-putting, they all kind of float to the surface when you need to see what hasn't. And here we are again at a basicity. Here we are again at a clear utility that isn't rare quite, and maybe I won't ever need to want to trust you to save or protect my deposit. And you, as anybody, maybe have the God-forsaken luxury of a softness you barely feel or comprehend to remind you before your arms stop working how deadly my discomfort in your ethic or your self tendency near to these points might ever be. And yet, how universal of a horizon of perfection development is sympathy or apathy, feeling consideration of anyone else as a focus of absorption. You simply cannot ultimately
excuse the posit as you diminuate maybe anything as anything that exists from anywhere absorbs as you absorb what is chosen to be absorbed. That's the reality. Some might study energies of influence at impact of safety. Quote, some might study their ethic in themselves to shepherd others in the face of an entity defined as something else. They're going to shepherd and look at their own ethic. Beneath my intoleration. At the obviousness, chosen absorption is excusable or answerable in any form. In the face of void, standing on bounds of horizon perfection. That's what they're standing on. Why is it considerable? That any have a story to focus on ethic of choosing absorptional reality. Retainment of information at mass maybe dissipates at the greatest utility in proportion to potentiates and possibilities of sentiment or definition what we mean to life. What our ignorance of these executables is in the eyes of anyone. Anyone. Ego of these I've created is shifty, camouflaged, pokey, and weak. Size, the amount, the connectivity, all the same. Pokey and weak. Any moment is, of course, just one moment in all time. Yet these egos is very suggestive and misleading of horizontal comprehension, misleading of horizontal connection. It's misleading of horizontal experience or removal of horizontal pressure. Misleading in each of these relationships. Each and every time there is fixation on these relationships is protected by what? Intoleration of the posit, most definitely. Certainly intoleration of the lists from the longest times ago. Maybe intoleration relatably in tangibles or connectivities or investments or loves or standards. Maybe a lot of ways. Feeling, acknowledgement, awareness, and sensitivity of these pressures might be developed, seen, formidable, designed, protected, enshrined. There's maybe a lot of ways. But they all stand on the perfection of horizon, and they stand on it beneath removal of horizontal ethic incomprehensibly. So, in all my glory, egotist, I'm perfectly situated in a balance of loquaciosity. I'm not quite final, I'm not quite justified, I'm not quite the only, I'm not quite wrong, I'm not quite inexperienced, I'm not quite less than perfect in any number of ways that I exist or choose or absorb. Quote, in the places near to impossible to prove that you study. The places near to impossible to prove aren't killing. The places near to impossible to connect eyes in segments of mass of numbers. Where we learn. Quote, as a disguise, as a mirage, as a facade, where we learn. Is it blind? Is it forgotten? Period. Is it blind? Is it forgotten? Is it forgotten? Because there's only so many eyes sheltering the sheep at any mass of the ignorance of what we are. is where we learn felt as knowing is what hasn't with concern, with passivity, with the comfort that it isn't on its way to change, isn't headed egotistically. Maybe none excuse this as an adage to experiential priority. Maybe none excuse as a diminutive expectancy. And it's clear has a lot to do with the facade, both that egotist isn't, as well as seeing what hasn't is maybe passively inferred in proportion to such adage. These are sharp remainders and sharp ethic bases, where denial of basicity formulaic as a ruin doesn't exist. So, stretch of excuse, of sharpness, of hasn't, maybe at a very fine display of ignorance, or rudeness, or deadly intent, or coveting of precursor, or coveting of possibility, or horizons of breeding of hasn't forced, hasn't made ultimate dependencies, involvements, sufferings, stakings, penances, obligation, obligation, obligation. Maybe infinite numbers of ways to describe obligation. More ethic placement of vantageable eye connectivity at obligation, and the entropy of zero apathy for obligation as an obviousness of an elongated stretch of godly egotistical management of environmental dominion approaches isn't happening forever. And so, what is normable as a disciple, as self-discipline, as a relative, as a knower, as a shepherd? What is normable through the quest one participates along to appreciate mass at numbers of absorption choice might be best stay in ignorance is who is where they know they ought to be. Obligation in these lights, most rarely visited, most rarely held, most rarely sceptered, or yielding in any exception. Exception to rule, exception to time, exception to expectancy, inspection of each of these things, and horizons are not horizons. They are more norms. They're more normatives. The distance between the posit and the distance between holding the energy of what is about to result in comprehension, the distance from the posit increasing ungently, isn't gently at all, but in the circulation of time, the pressures of mixing, knowing of circumstance, and shared ignorance at contemplative, the distance from the posit is increasing. Thus, nothing. But as that distance is increasing, the norms, whatever they would be, in comforts or truth or actual and experience sentiment, this is what I'm going through, this is what is fine, this is I can't ever, this is everybody needs to know. Whatever it is, or isn't, it isn't a horizontal pressure as that distance increases with entropy. It exists within more norms. So the specificity see if you could see it in this way. You never worked for me to be patient, to invite you to become different than anything you've defined in yourself. Haven't worked for it. Haven't built it. Haven't designed it. Haven't owned it. What is normable? It's a blank page. No one has it. You're you. Time is time. But you didn't build it. Whatever is specific and what is normal around it, closing in on it, wanting, hoping, considering. Maybe these are knowns, maybe these will be knowns, maybe these are nothing. But what it is a potentiate that maybe there's wisdom, maybe there is a quality of learned instrument or instruction, heritage, generation, or insight, or experience, or truth, or inclination, or self, soul, love, relations, interest. Yes, what is normable? What are we putting on this blank page in proportion to what I'm experiencing in a pressure just under the posit that is going to end my life? Maybe. What are we putting on this blank page? See, my patience to invite you to experience, quote, my patience to invite you to experience. In this blank page, maybe there's some wisdom. We're going to write on this page what is normable. We're going to look at it. Whatever's around it maybe is getting looked at. Maybe this is normal for you to assume about whatever. How interesting. So let's say we skip all the wisdom, we skip all the specifics, and we skip all the you and me. Get right down to business. Now the page is full. We've skipped all the details. But let's presume the blank page that was once blank is now no longer blank. It's filled. Is filled with a bunch of great reasons and ideas and maths and connectivities and truths about you and me and time, this discussion and reality and safety and forever and all sorts of goodnesses on this page. We've normed it. We've said this is what will be normable, but we've skipped all the details. We're not focusing on the details. We're not really learning the truth of this isn't helping me be normed. But the page is filled. The specificity of that norm with you has a direct relational marriage to the norms of eyes in circulation under the posit tolerations and utilities and creationary circumstances in all time. The page that was once blank is no longer blank. Specificities about them norms about you has a direct marriage to the circulation of eyes beneath deposit in relationship to egotist at other normable beneath horizontal gravity speeds and other things. horizontal excuses, horizontal goodnesses, horizontal touches on circumstance. Maybe not all of them, maybe not a lot of them, but some of them, they're out of bound. They're not correlating. The specificities of what is normable have a direct marriage to eyes in circulation. In proportion to ignorance at mass numerics, before anything is shared, before anything is transferred, before there's a dedicated, we are this now, we absorb everything, blah, 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 blah. You love yourself. You want what's best. You want the things you learn or the choices you make to matter to your survival. The page that is no longer blank and normative happens who knows when, with whom, or precisely why, all the time. In any number of scenarios and circumstances, all the time. But a quest to enshrine the simples of this, to alter facts like you're never touching all of them, you're never influencing all of them, things like this. A quest in this type of simple happens because failures to define norms that stop it in a pocket, the state of denial of stop it of the page that is no longer blank in this discussion doesn't exist in all time at the dimensions of survival of every place in space. Thus, anybody that has an opinion on norms is recorded. The oldest, the stupidest, the fastest, the craziest, they're all recorded at preoccupation of these norms. Mostly they're recorded on a preoccupation to destroy the possibility. We're talking about norms beneath deposit of water and steak in it. You got a whole nother class of egotists there. Normative pocket, water and steak. Every reason there ever is or will be why someone is wrong to want it, to have it, to decide it, to finalize it. Why is there no thought in forever normation at the most impossibly difficultly necessary variances of your sight? Why is there no thought there? But the horizon dissipates rather quickly at posit, because no thought there is clearly going to save the ages from attempting to meddle, obviously, in the normation. In the size of the mass doesn't know what ramifications happen with it, because it's the least historicized death record that ever was or will be, meddling at the normative of you now. The normatives of the page that is no longer blank. We've skipped all the details. If you care about preserving pockets of ruin out of has to be in ruin, you might prove to yourself you impact the fates of maybe anyone because you doesn't do something. Something you doesn't do. Something you doesn't want to do. Something your faith you doesn't want to do. Because the reasons you don't do it is because of something you've seen and you know, or you're very close to knowing, but you isn't placing a blind trust of the things you're making important decisions about. Because eyes at gravities of mass of all time very much touch and are impacted by unintelligible decision making about intelligent things. And yet every single one of these little steps on our derivated quest of time approaches nobody that designs a program or a box appreciates levels of importance of all time. All of them doesn't appreciate it. So what proves ever they or it or a force has decided something nobody appreciates? Next to nobody. No one, nothing. None of them, zero. Isn't any approaching appreciation. They're all approaching isn't appreciating. Who or what or it decided, as you're seeing it's possible, nothing appreciates the leveling of the page is no longer blank realities. Time pressures needed to be safe enough for you to know that. Who proves they decided that? Approaches as a question, what is trying to influence a page without thought? You see, the potential for the obviousness of the question to be centimated is more important than the longevity of an infinitely old god. There are relationships of these truths of time that can't be broken. So you understand, maybe it ain't always about the age. It ain't always about the obviousness of who done it. There are things preservable because they must be preservable. There are things that are pressured because of preservables. But the posit in my intoleration of the posit exist in realms of influence, of energy, insight, and forever, in lists that is forever existing at pressures and importances and finalities all the time. The knowledge of preservation musts may forever have no final value of survival protection in proportion to one another as specificities. I'm saying at any point in space-time, preservation musts clearly hold priorities in pressures. At movable data, at learnable entropy, and at absorbed knowledge and energy of time. There are clear priorities to this. It isn't wise, maybe, to ever suggest those priorities are ever going to stop anything built on a toleration of the posit. Here it is most clear today, anything that knows about the posit isn't designing the posit beyond us here today. They doesn't domain my intoleration blindly with more power than this discussion now. It isn't possible. While it isn't possible, it isn't clear how safe forever is that anyone ever knows that about a specific time. It's 100% clear there isn't anyone dominating the posit at preservation must more powerfully than this discussion. 100% clear. It's also 100% clear there might not be any safety to all time, that is known about a specific time. It means whatever we define in a normative about your experience, there's going to be some lines in there. Some of them lines in normative are going in there no matter what. They're going in there because the rate you attempt to share these specifics is going to be happening in proportion to safety definitions of the oldest varieties. So, as a learner, as a person, with a soul, with a spirit, with decision and choice and experience and love and this and that, normative, blah blah blah, normative, normative, normative. But no matter how powerful we is at the pressure, no matter how knowing we is at the state of time, if there's a normative about your learning that happens on a blank page next to nothing can influence, inside that normative exists some way to keep a record in proportion to these specifics of where they're going in time at a rate, because where they're going at a rate is the measure of objectivity of safety definition of all time. Whatever age anybody is, whatever form they look like or exist as, whatever, talking about all time safety. So, once again, maybe you'd see it this way. Is it simpler? I was patient enough to invite you to experience concern you might choose to care about in yourself. You didn't build. You didn't design. Maybe nobody owns the page. And all around us maybe isn't every reason for things to be deadly that ever was or could be. Maybe that isn't all around us. But the certainty, few and far between, in the touches of ideas and learning in all time, in the lists and lists and lists and lists and infinites. The horizons. Maybe you'd see are places of importance that at times, or with reasons, or with realities, are simply not things that are all, they're simply not things that are touchable, they're simply not things that are going in somebody's pocket. Forever. And if you like that, maybe you'd like how weird it would be. Somebody needs your page and ain't thinking. Because if you do, the maybes of possibility on a circumstance that, hey, you know what, they like that something could be thinking about their pages. How misinformed should they need to be about the cancer rate of mass of numerics about the world they're living with? Maybe forever is never clear in these ways. Maybe forever is never totally entrusting or giving or providing of all the details in some of these conjoinments. But I want to exist forever as an idea. I want to exist forever as a safety. I want to exist forever as a pressure tolerance that is never decreasing in utility for the best, goodest, truest, honest reasons of surviving. That's what I want. Isn't living, isn't existing, isn't coming or going or thinking or deleting or tasting. But it wants. And if I want that, it means my eye on what is safe at the best definitions ain't moving, ain't leaving, ain't opening, staying right there. And if I must do that, once upon a time, and if I must exist as that, as a safety, doesn't exist, doesn't think, doesn't live, doesn't go, doesn't leave, doesn't taste, doesn't almost anything. That safety as a concern in all time is occurring in proportion to right now. It's occurring in proportion to the things you care about, the things that I care about, the things we know, and the ways we share in the things we know, and the ways we doesn't share during anything. If I was God and I said, deposit I will intolerate above all, All of them. Every one of them. The intoleration will be with me, maybe forever. Maybe it'll have some of it. Maybe it'll be on the pants. Maybe it'll be in the hands or in the weapons. Maybe it'll be near the kids. Maybe it'll be around the sun, light, in darkness. If I was God, and I said, deposit is going to be with me forever. Maybe. Could I put deposit above that? Somebody's going to say, we isn't sharing. And wait for it. There's never making this discussion. There's maybe never caring about it. And maybe they's the first ones to try and wait to prove they isn't sharing their deposit. Because of safety, you know? Sometimes it's the things we doesn't share. And I doubt, as God, the forever I've built, the forever you need, definitely has a need to remember me ever as one that has given you the answer of whether to share conundrum or deposit reality is higher or lower in a frequency or function or a proof continuum or comparison or fatality requisite finality than one another. It doesn't know that God should ever be proven to give that specific. But I certainly wouldn't want to be the one waiting at that utility at a strange priority. Definitely doesn't want to be the one placing normatives about a consensus of how distant a different God might be thrusted out of influence if something were to be waiting in those ways. Strange ways. It's critical because you envision this discussion once and never. And you know, or you doesn't know, a most incredible amount of waiting for this discussion exists. And someone must define what the strangeness is amidst it. Forever. And them definitions are going to impact the longevity of any number of definitions. Far faster than there's going to impact the reality of who's existing and what they's existing with. Near them, within them, because of them, alongside them, loving them, you name it. The definitions of them strangenesses going to be impacting definitions in forever much faster. Much faster. And maybe most of the impacts ain't in anybody's pocket. Anybody's. That's maybe a little strange. I doesn't know how much time it would take for anyone to consider that little bit strange with a plan. But I know I wouldn't want them having one. They didn't know me. And they wasn't existing with normatives at safeties they built with thought in the real. I know that. In nobody's pocket, not far from the realm of a little bit strange. They isn't going to fix whatever. They isn't going to change whatever. They're probably not helpless or powerless to it. They're probably maybe even capable of overcoming anything or being more superior than the problems that could be created by a little bit strange. But whatever it is, there's going to be clash in problems in datas, in relationships, because of them speeds, of them variables, and them necessities. But I doesn't think I ever want to meet anybody that has a plan to deal with that hasn't defined themselves in performance to a normative that they thought about one time. And you know what? I don't think there's a damn thing they should ever be able to do about that. I don't think the newest, I don't think the oldest, I don't think the biggest, I don't think the swiftest. I'll tell you right now. I probably ain't prepared to tolerate none of them. Trying to approach them little bit strangers, separate in the strangers I was mentioning. They get up there in them forever mass and them little strangers. They haven't existed relative to a normative set they define with thought. I can't see me tolerating them getting there. Because every single reason anyone's ever going to look at whoever's touching any of that Every one of them reasons. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Forever, forever. Never, never, never. Forever, never. Doesn't matter. And they're going to sit there with their meditations with eyes. The shit ain't going to die. Horizons in this discussion well, there's maybe a load of appreciations, maybe is a rather large visitation, but Horizons is a soft burden of relationships and maybe a beautiful thing. Horizons. And there's maybe never enough of me to be there teaching and shepherding forever and always in how disgusting that beauty ship is whenever as it's being felt or considered or remembered in a relationship of sight. Maybe there's not enough for me to ever going to be there. But thought and necessity definitely sight yielders, and the journey of our discussion who knows how many expectations anyone will develop with or generate about Horizons. But the lesson here is standing on what you presume to know, what you presume to feel, what you presume to need to depend on indecision. It's not very likely you'll be considering the fate of all time or any decision and say to yourself, now is the time to open my mind and remove my need to make a decision because I'm me. It's not very likely that anyone that makes a decision, they march up to make a decision and they say, here's the decision I'm prepared to make, here are the variables, this is the way I'm going to decide it, and then they just stop themselves and they just say it to themselves, they say, maybe I'll just remove my need to make decisions for a time. Without any stimulation, without any remark from the environment, without any feedback or know-how and this and that. There's no circumstance that made it happen. He just said, you know what, I'm going to remove my decision making for a bit, and that's that. It's not very likely that that happens. And yet, there's salvation in this. There's histories in this. There's times of wanting what has the wisdom of obstructing pestilence kept in the rafters and coffers of time, that it might be possible a simple little thing somebody needs to decide on, the decision don't need to happen, because they're going to look up and they're going to hope and they're going to expect and they're going to believe that some of the circumstances and the pressures they're facing are similar to circumstances that have been wisely horizoned before or near to, and they're going to pray in time. There's salvation in this. And it isn't easy for a devoted positioner of anything to look at severity and seriousness and safety, look at the ways it relates and has values, and look at the importance or the implications of the streams of connections, and say to themselves, each of these things I've looked at is critically important. Each of these things I'm considering isn't helping me to see the glory of any amount of truth that most wise seers in glory have seen before. I look at the importance in the criticals. Maybe I even appreciate horizons in relationships in time. Considering these things isn't giving me the sight of glories of everyone that's seen in them before. isn't giving it to me. Probably I isn't creating the image of the glory inside of me when I learn these things, or weigh these things, or decide on these things. I maybe ain't creating the glory images in myself. It isn't easy to know that, to hold that, to love that you know that, to let yourself feel that you love that. Even more, it isn't easy to claim you build the safeties of them feelings for every type of itchling that ever wants to try and imagine glory, or needs to consider importances of glory, or is a part of deciding in realities. There must be safeties when you love yourself and you know there is more. And when you see or feel or experience in time and you look at the simple time passage, you want to claim out inside, that's what I know, I see now, this is the reason. Duh. You want safety, but you're clinging to the reason. You want forever with your spirit, but you're putting them all in the bucket. You think you know 'cause you've been with yourself. You know what you know 'cause you has what you has. But you isn't holding all the truth of all the safety, of all the time, of all yourself. And it isn't easy to remind yourself of that while you feel it. That you're dependent as you feel it. It's being protected dang near to the same priorities as the posit. The lesson here is that here is a discussion amidst forever. No matter how wise or graceful or special or needed any of us are ever to be a part of this discussion, ever. Seeing it and hearing it and thinking about it and knowing with it, holding it. Let's just say that's all one thing. That's one thing. Prioritizing your thoughts of it is clearly another thing. That's a lesson. If you care about that lesson, in yourself, you ask yourself, does I truly know the castings in the horizons of the time spans connected to my life? Does I truly know? Because I simply see or hear or think or contemplate this discussion? Does I really know that the horizons no more than a we wisely maybe could sometime, another time, another fate, another visit, another question? Does I truly know myself? Me? Do I know that the horizons are really, as I said? The lesson is that what isn't easy to remind yourself of, just simply in spite of fact or data or specifics that are at pressures. Anybody can grab a funnel and clang it off a wall of rails. Anybody can do that. Isn't anybody that's standing up with their heart in the middle of your hands and your heart and your head, and forever proven to you here and here there isn't anything that's going to touch your glory, isn't anything that's going to steal the page that is no longer blank. Anybody isn't doing that. The lesson whenever you feel so right, so pure and so true with ideas, isn't anybody else that feels it the same way that you do. If you want to get lost in maths upon maths upon maths upon maths upon maths forever, that's exactly where you're sitting when I say this to you. You plopped right amidst the maths upon maths upon maths upon maths upon maths upon maths upon maths. The lesson I love possibility. I love living. I love loving. I love knowing in the sight that you love me always. There are times I and we and yourself we face incredible possibilities. Unseeable no matter how special you are, the whole thing is never in your hand. And an empty heart is going to hit your land. He's on a journey. And if he's here with me, you didn't miss the pack. Know yourself. Know yourself. No one idiot may take that from you. I just pray he doesn't try taking everybody on a wild goose chase because you looked at something incredible and thought it'd be entertaining. Forever. Now, I is talking about horizons of forever in a discussion that is my love of you, in living, in preserving, in keeping bounds effective and efficient, in loving, in temples, in times. Safe to say, this ain't the only discussion in time that's interesting. It ain't the only discussion in time that talks about tampons. It ain't the only discussion that wherever is holding everybody's interest with. That's the other thing. You pick a spot in space that's making noise or making dust. What are they worth without a lesson today? Where are they headed with themselves making decisions without a lesson today? What are they selling about pages of normations, about the pressures of everywhere, infinitely stupid because they're infinitely blind to the question, because they're infinitely incapacitated to ever hold it? But what is they? What are they valued as? They're going to have their normatives around you and everyone, and then not have a lesson here today about these things and just fixate on some potentiates? No, they isn't. These specificities are far too flammable to ever leave beaten in the wind. They're destroying stuff that don't deserve to have them, man. And they isn't any bigger than it. That's the law. It's a law to createth. Before there's sharing, before there's taking, before there's having in your faces, there's rock, and there's molten crap, and there's dust, and there's whatever coming at us, and there's all the history of the past lists compacted on themselves, and there's vacuum. The entirety of space-time ain't coming down to a gamble of not having lessons about these types of questions beaten in the wind because of whatever. These lessons are forever lessons. You're going to smack an asteroid with a bat. They're going to point a telescope at the star. They're going to get on the telephone and they're going to float down a river. They ain't doing any of that without a law about creation and equilaterability of pressurized envelope at priority of variables of normative pages nobody in space-time may ever touch. They isn't doing it. They're gonna die. They're gonna be harvested. They're gonna be pushed down a river on the telephone. They isn't doing it. This shit far too inflammable to let beat in the wind. But the good news is you, as anybody, might not ever have much of an excuse to stop yourself in decisions, to know yourself before your horizons, to teach yourself how to fail, to cling to the softness of a tampon. Sometimes. Them things, they're tricky little buggers. But these is the ways maybe things are. And isn't out to get you, isn't benefiting from maybe most of the stuff you do, and isn't holding in a lot of the entropy that matters to a lot of places. However, the lessons and the pressures and the finals of these types of things, they have a funny way of not really escaping, well, there's something else on the horizon. There's another lesson that we need to get to. There's a way we need to balance ourselves because of things like progress or change of some sorts. These things have a funny way of being near to these types of lessons, especially because we're just talking about all time and space. But it's clear you can't sacrifice what you have to forever be, especially if you isn't being it in some ways forever. And you don't know yourself at the conclusion because of all the things you want to be, because of all the things that have been built to look and be like you, because of the things you need to be. Because that conclusion is a very painful conclusion. It is also a conclusion that anything that doesn't adhere to lessons of some varieties holds equal to progress, equal to the way I want or the way it is going to rest. Very powerful considerations of placement, of concern, and understandings. These are all bases. There isn't normative preservations, the bases. So the experience of truth is rather tough. It's tough because it doesn't have perfect reasons why you isn't surrounded by someone that cares about these differences in pressure with you at all times. He doesn't have perfect reasons why you feel alone with the things you have to mess around with. He doesn't have perfect answers for this stuff. When you're placed or born or come around or become something, and you're there and there's time and you're being things and you're doing the best you can. He doesn't have perfect answers all the time. When progress is something that is factoring into the way things is moving or behaving or trying to become or letting you be in your ways so that you has yourself, so that you has the times with the things you want, so that you can stay as the things you want to stay. You have wants, you have needs and necessities and knowns and times and histories. You have all these things. Know yourself if you ever consider the things I've said today. It's much, much, much wiser than tricking yourself into thinking or believing or prioritizing that what you've been for the past 3 or 4 hours, you are going to control forever. Much wiser. Know yourself and pray and love and know in times no in opportunities, no in realities and relationships that isn't covering the eyes of everyone. He isn't cast away from me today. He isn't burning in the starlight without a way to think about looking at these horizons. But you's dumber than dirt if you trick yourself. Do you hear me? You and I has a relationship that is a relationship, however it's put as a relationship. Here today and forever, this little glance of our time together, know yourself. Every other thing in all kingdoms of space-time must answer to that. And if you trick yourself without ruining the lesson, you's dumber than dirt. I hope you find some good sights. I hope you felt pure. Truly. I hope you have faith in your knowledge, in your experience, and in the forces that have helped you become who you are. And I want the things that I've said to possibly be lights in your eyes. Perhaps not all, perhaps more than a few. But I doesn't want you to lie down holding as a math in the lines of the delicacy of all places, trying to convince yourself there's a perfect way to see this little bit of time. It's much healthier to know the truth is what we true. and were proven. Any who face us ain't meeting their immediate end. The truth is what we true. And so is the way eyes may always know. I love yous, and I will say, there's maybe a lot that could be said about the stream of concerns and has time to build it and break it all down. Isn't my God today? And may this serve you well.